Today, we're going to build functionality that enables a user to select files and upload them to a server. To upload a file, there are many techniques. The most prominent among them is to use an input element of type file. Just to demonstrate what it does without any code, I'll create a blank HTML file. And I'll just have a form tag within which I'll include an input of type file and a submit button. That's all my code is. I haven't written any JavaScript or CSS. Let's see what this achieves out of the box. Now, to be able to upload something, I need a server. So I've set up this application to run on port 8088 on a localhost web server. Out of the box, just those lines that we wrote give us these two buttons. This is the upload button and this is the file control. If I click the browse button, I'm able to select files from my file system. If I select a file, you will note that I'm pressing the shift key. I'm not still able to select more than one file. By default, if you don't write any code, this is the default behavior. The file input control lets you select just a single file. I'll select a file and by default it displays the name of the file. One important property of the file control of this input element is value. Let's see what the value property for this file control reads. If you check the value property, it has the name of the file prefixed with a fake path. This is the fake path. This is a literal string that gets prefixed to any file that you select. The reason for this fake path is that we do not want the designers of the World Wide Web rightly thought that it would be a security hazard to reveal the actual path of a file on a client or a user's file system to a web application server, because otherwise slowly I could just have the user upload files from different places and get a feel or an outline of their directory structure, and then imagine what that allows me to do when the user is asleep or when they're not using the application. I can write things that or even when they're using my application, I can write all kinds of things that read files from their file system if I know the locations of different parts on their file system. So this string is attached by default. So that's a prominent property, value. Now, if I were to make a post request, I will need to add another attribute to the form called enctype, which stands for enclosed type. In this, I'm telling the form, or I'm telling the server, that this form encloses this MIME type of data. And the MIME type, when you're using a file input control, you could select one file or potentially multiple files. I haven't taught you how to select multiple files, which I'm going to do in a bit, but you could select many files, and all those files are chunked, or all those files are serially appended one after the other, and there is a boundary drawn in between each of those files, and that whole composite unit is packed like a parcel, and that's denoted by a MIME type called multipart form data, multipart/form -data. So I'm telling the server, you must expect in this post request this MIME type, so it knows how to parse the data. Now, adding just this much allows you to select and upload a file to a server. That's all. You don't need any JavaScript or anything else. So I'll select a file. I cannot right now select more than one file. I'm pressing the shift key, but I can't. It doesn't allow me to select more than one file. Let me select just a single file. And sorry, let me first refresh it just to make sure I have the latest code. And let's just verify if I have the latest code. Yes, I've got the latest code. Let's look at the network tab. I will select a file and click upload. Of course, now it has posted to an endpoint called index.html on the server, but the server doesn't have any code to handle the post request, so it says this method is not allowed, which is fine. But all I wanted to do was to look at the body of the request and show you what it looks like, or if you've got any file actually posted. If you look at where we posted at index.html. We made a post request, and the request had a special header saying the content type is multi-part / form data, and then it had some random string. This string is the boundary that I was just talking about, that is inserted in between each file, and the params tab shows you the request body. Right now nothing was posted, no file was posted. Ideally it should have posted that file, but let's try that again. Okay, and if I upload this, the params tab should have had the body of the request. Anyway, we'll get to that in a moment. Now, to select more than one file, all you have to do is add an attribute to the file input element called multiple. It doesn't need to have a value. You can just leave it as a standalone independent attribute. And this, simply that attribute, will now allow us to select all of these files. And it says you have 3 files, and I can upload these files. And now again, we don't have any code handling it, so this method not allowed status response is perfectly fine. I want to look at the body of the request and see if the stuff was actually sent. Okay, I don't know why the stuff is not sent. Usually it is sent, but as we develop this example, we'll get to know why. I might be missing something, and it's hard to think while making these videos. So let's carry on with the example. Now, one other property that I want to make you aware of this file input control, if you select more than one file, let's say I select all of these, and let's get the file control and again look at the value. The value property has just the first file that you selected, and it has a fake path. It's just a string that has This is just a string that has the fake path of the file. So this is no good. It's not helpful. I want to get some metadata about all the files I selected, and that is available to us with the property files. There is a property named files. This is a file list, a special kind of list that tells you how many files are selected and some metadata about each of these files. A couple of things to note about these. This file list is not an array. So you can't use array methods like for each or map or reduce on this file. You can, if you wanted to use those methods, you could copy this file list into an array using array.from. So you could do something like, I'll just add a script, and you could do something like array.from and give it the input control files, and then you can call for each or map or reduce on this array. But you can't call it on the files object. The files object is simply a read-only list that you can't add to. You can't add any files to it. You can't modify any existing files in it. Or you can't remove the files from it, because that's a security implication. Think of the security hazard that would entail if the code on the client side was allowed to manipulate or add or remove from this file object. Then any script running on any page could add anything to this file object. Or think of third-party scripts. You have ads you place on your page, or Google Analytics, or Share This plugin, or different kinds of plugins. Those are written by somebody you don't know, and they inject their code into your application's code. So think of what they could do if this were allowed. So the file list is a read-only kind of list that you can't attach anything to. And let's just look at the files property even more closely. Each of these has an interface called file that has these 5 properties. One is the Unix timestamp of the date and time that this file was last modified. This is the name of the file, just the name, not the whole path. And this is the number of bytes of the file, the size of the file in bytes, and this is the MIME type. And this is a extension, a WebKit extension, which is helpful if you want to select a folder, and a folder may have subfolders. Let's say you selected a folder, and then that folder would entail selecting all the folders and files in those folders. So each item would be either a file or a folder, and the whole relative path, that is the path of that item, whether a file or folder, relative to the folder you selected, would be shown here. If what I'm saying doesn't make any sense, forget it, it's not relevant. It's not a standard feature anyway. It's not available on any browser that isn't powered by the WebKit engine. The relevant properties are these 4. And you can use this one also, but the WebKit relative path, but I'd suggest that you don't use it. In another video, I'll show you how to use it. It's pretty simple. It's not difficult. And then you have that for each file. This is an image file. Similarly, this is another file. And then you have the length. So there's nothing you can do with this file list. It's a read-only thing. Let's create a new MVC project and write some server-side code. And I don't need any of this bullshit, so I'm going to delete everything from this project. I'll just delete all the bundles, everything. I'll leave the jQuery bundle, but delete everything else. I don't need any bootstrap or anything else. Okay, I need a handle. I'll just leave it in. I need the default route. I'll leave that in. I don't need any of the scripts. I'll leave the jQuery IntelliSense and jQuery and the min and minmap. I don't need any of these files. I don't need modernizer. I just need the jQuery file. I actually don't even need these. I won't get into what all this is, but I just need the jQuery files. I'll leave that in. And let's delete everything actually. I'll delete even the view start. Okay, and go to the home controller. I'll delete all of these. And I'll just create an action called upload. This would return a view. Let's add a view. It'll be called upload. It'll be empty. I don't want any layout page. It's not a partial view. Once I have the view, I'll delete everything and copy and paste this HTML into this view. Now this is without any JavaScript. Let's see what gets posted to the server. If I make a post action with the same name, now obviously you need to have an argument, otherwise C#, the language rules do not permit a method to have the same name, 2 methods to have the same name and also the same parameter signatures. So what do I want to put here so that it gets bound to the file input control? First, to do that, I need to give a name to the file input control because MVC binds things on name. And now I need to put something here which is called file. If you scan a few types and just do some guesswork, you will come across this class called HttpPostedFile, and you would think, obviously, that this is the type I need to use here. But This is a sealed class with a non-public constructor. So the default model binder cannot create an instance of this class. So even though it is actually a good candidate that maps well to the file control on the client side and can be bound manually if you write some code, but the default model binder will not bind this your file control to this class because it cannot instantiate it. So a better class to use is a public class with a public constructor. It's a base class called file HttpPostedFile base. That's what the default model binder will automatically bind your files to, because this is the wrong type. So that's one mistake you want to take care of. There's our same UI. Now I'll just open index.html and oHenry. I select these two files and I click upload and I get the error. Why is that? Because this is null. So if I change this to HTTP file base, that'll bind the default model binder will then bind that control to this. Now let me set a breakpoint. I'll select a few files. I'll select all of these files. 4 files selected. And if we break here, we see that there's something over here. It does have something. Now it has only one file, and that's the next problem. I uploaded 4 files, but I have only the first file. That is because every file you upload is bound to one instance of HttpPostedFile base. Since you uploaded many files, you want to have some kind of a collection here, either an array or an IEnumerable of it. Anything, it'll bind to anything as long as it's a collection. You could do this and it'll bind See, I have 2 files now. The same information that was in the client for each file, I have it over here. Or I could even have an array. I could have an IList, I could have an array, I could have an iCollection, I could have higher order collection types also. It'll bind to all of them. But the baser it is, the better it is, generally for polymorphism. Now the next thing is, this is many files and the name doesn't indicate that. So I'd like to make this plural. Now if I've made this argument plural, I need to go back and change the control's name also to the same name, otherwise the model binder will not bind it. And even then, this is a better name that's more indicative of the plurality of the contents of this control rather than simply file. That's the other thing you need to take care of. I recently had a Stack Overflow question, which I also posted an answer to. And that's the question in which I had a file input type and a submit button, just like our scenario, and had an enclosed type of form data and a method of post, and on the server I had just an HTTP posted file. Erroneously I had taken this and it wasn't binding to this, and I discovered what the reason was, which I told you, that you need HTTP posted file base and you need some kind of a collection of that. So feel free to read this answer. I will post a link to this in the description for this video. Now on the server you can do different things with it. You can basically save for each file. You can save. There's a function called save as. You can give it a path that I think is a path on the physical drive on the server. So it's not a virtual path, it's a physical path, and you can get a physical path using the server.mapPath function. I'm not going to do all of that. My focus here is how to use the file control. And so this should be good enough for us. If we get something over here, then that should be good enough. I'll display how many files we've uploaded to the server. Let's just run this much. I'll select 2 files and upload them to the server, and we get the message from the server, 2 files uploaded. Let's look at the network tab to see what we actually sent to the server. I'll reload this control, and we made a request to the upload action, and this time you will see that we actually sent each of the files separated by this boundary. Here's a boundary. This is some metadata about the file. The first file is ohenry.jpg. That's the file contents serialized as a string. That's the second file. You can check that by selecting a text file. Let's select this file and upload it. And if I see the params, I'll see that I have a boundary, metadata about the file, contents of the file, and then the boundary again. Another attribute of the file element is accept, which allows you to filter the kinds of files you can select. Let me demonstrate that. Let's say we want the user to be able to select only image files. So I can come here and say accept and pass in a comma separated list of either MIME types, like image.png is a MIME type, comma image.jpg is a MIME type. If I'm not sure of whether this is JPG or JPEG or MPEG, what's the correct MIME type, I can just say image.star, and that will allow me to select all kinds of images. This time I'm only able to select image files. This dialog has a file filter and it shows me only the image files. Now, mind you, that attribute only controls the visual display for this dialog. It doesn't actually hinder me from selecting a file different from the filter I specified. I still need some code on both the client and the server to be able to hedge against that. But for what it's worth, you get this nice filter. Also, this filter is not consistent across all browsers. If you were to run this on different browsers, you would get different results. If I run this on Edge, I might see the same result for image files. No, look, I get a different visual display. IE will also give me something completely different. Look, IE gives me this kind of a thing that includes HTML and stuff. So all browsers have implemented everything differently. You got to check every piece of code you write on every damn browser before you actually commit it. That's how crazy it has gotten these days. Anyway, moving on. And one event I'd like to tell you about is called the change event on the file input element, and that happens when you change the selection of files. Let's say I select a file, ohenry, that would have affected both the value property and the files property. Files property would have just one file, right? If I select something else, even if I select the same file again but also select other files, that triggers a change event because the selection of the files has changed. So the value property may or may not have changed because the value property displays just the first file you selected, but the files property will have changed. Now it has 2 files. Now how can we use this change event? Any which way you want. Whatever you want to do if the user selects a file. Maybe you want to preview the images. I can show you an example I have. So I select files and I preview them in the change event. Now I'm not going to do this right now, but let's just use the change event. In this example, what we'll do is we'll select jQuery. I will define for this file input control And what we're going to do in this change event is just display in a list the names of the files that have been selected. So I'll create a list out of this, let's say an ordered list, and I won't put any contents here. In the change event, what I'm going to do is if event, the files will be in the event.target.files, because the event.target is going to resolve to the file input control, and the files property on that has the files. So I'm saying if there are any files, and first remove everything from the list if it had previous items. Maybe you made a selection, remove all the previous items from the list. So I'm going to say from this list, remove all the children, and then for each of the files, remember you cannot do, as I said earlier, you cannot do files.forEach because it is not an array. You can do array.from and then for each, or better yet, just use a, do not use a for in loop because that's only for enumerable properties. Use a for off loop. I'll get each file, and then for each file I'll just add an li, and that li will have the name of the file. That's it. And I'll add this li to the list. That's about it. Now I can select both of these files, and I have them on the list. If I select different files, these 10 files, then I see this. And we can even upload them on the server. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new.
There was one thing I forgot to mention. If I removed any JavaScript code that I had and simply had the HTML markup only, the control out of the box still would allow me to drag and drop files on it. Here I have a few files. I'm going to select some image files out of these and drag and drop them on the control. Since I've removed the JavaScript, we do not see the list below, but the control still selects these files. This can be verified by checking the files property on the control.
Do you want to start a career as a software developer? Maybe you already are a software developer, but you're just a beginner with 1 to 4 years of experience, and you don't quite understand what's going on. You need some help. You need a helping hand to pull you up, teach you stuff that you ought to have learned while you were in college, but you didn't get the chance to learn. Maybe you didn't have good teachers then. Maybe you didn't have the time then. Or maybe you're someone who's not a software developer. You're a hairstylist, a mechanical engineer. Maybe you work at a retail store, arranging clothes and doing all those chores, and you want to make a better career for yourself. Then I have a course I will be starting online, which you can attend from your home. It's not a bunch of videos you have to watch. It'll be me actually teaching you every other day or so for a couple of hours every week over a long period of time. I'll be holding your hand. I'll be teaching you everything from scratch, assuming you don't know anything about anything. And by the end of the course, I'm pretty confident you will, if you've got the aptitude, which I'll help you determine before you start the course. So I don't want you to take the course if you don't have the aptitude. But you have the aptitude and you put in the hard work, I guarantee you'll go a long way. I guarantee that you'll be very successful as a software developer. Please go to my website satyaish.net scroll to the bottom for now and join the mailing list. Please remember, I do not spam anyone, I do not send any foolish emails about anything else, and I don't need to sell your email to anyone. I don't even know who to sell it to. And if I knew, I wouldn't sell it to anyone. So there's no apprehension you should have about those things. I'm just a regular plain old guy just like you, and trying to make a living doing what I know best. Shiva, 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 Shambo. Shiva, 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 Shambo. Mahadeva Shambo. Mahadeva Shambo. Mahadeva Shambo. Mahadeva Shambo. Jaya Jaya Shiva Shambo. Jaya Jaya Shiva Shambo. Jaya Jaya Shiva Shambo. Jaya Jaya Shiva Shambo.
The world you encounter is full of boundaries. They appear to surround all objects. They delineate your body and define its shape. They form the surfaces and edges of everything within your view. They mark the extent of your yard, the edge of your town or city, the dimension of your country, and many even more subtle delineations. And yet, boundaries are the most illusory of reality's apparent aspects. While very useful to make sense of the world, essential indeed, the impression boundaries give is that things are isolated entities. That impression, that basic assumption that each object is a unit unto itself, separate from all that surrounds it, that impression is extremely deceiving in a very significant way. Here in Volume 5, we've been looking at words and ideas, exploring how a word and the idea behind it differ from the real nature of things. The notion of borders, of boundaries, of a surface confining any object, lines delineating open spaces, defined markers imposing time on a flowing now moment. All these imply an essence of things that is not really there.
Shiva Shambo. Jaya Jaya Shiva Shambo. Jaya Jaya Shiva Shambo. Jaya Jaya Shiva Shambo. Mahadevi Shambo. Mahadevi Shambo. Mahadevi Shambo.
There's an American psychologist who read that human beings are all creatures with special needs. And I think one of our special needs is for meaning. Our lives are not meant to be just lived for the daily sake of physical existence. Now, that meaning in a tribal setting is automatically provided for you because you're bigger than yourself and you belong to something greater than yourself. And when you're connected with nature, you're connected with some spiritual practice or belief, you have some meaning that transcends your daily struggles for survival. Now, this society has pretty much reduced that. Like we talk about meaning a lot, and we talk about broad values such as freedom and democracy and so on, but that's not what people experience in their daily lives. Nobody experiences democracy in their lives. Mostly people work in institutions where they're told what to do, and they have no voice on the matter whatsoever. And the freedom is very often reduced to making choices between meaningless alternatives. So there's a deep, and there's more and more disconnection, as we've already mentioned. So there's a deep lack of meaning in people's lives. The addictions can certainly come along and provide a false, temporary, but momentarily satisfactory sense of meaning. And meaning is important to all of us. We all want to feel there's something more significant about our lives than simply the fact that we have dinner in the evening and we defecate in the morning.